Recap of Episode 1: Secrets and Sacrifices. In the vibrant town of Cape Coast, 15-year-old Efua lives under the weight of her parents' high expectations. Her father, Kofi, is a stoic fisherman who believes deeply in the power of education to change their future, while her mother, Mame Essie, a meticulous seamstress, watches over her with love and quiet concern. Despite their guidance, Efua's longing for freedom and the thrill of the unknown lead her into a secret relationship with Abena, a charming young man from a nearby village. The episodes build on their growing connection, with stolen moments under the old baobab tree, a silent witness to their whispered dreams. Kwabena's stories of Accra, filled with opportunity and adventure, plant seeds of desire and doubt in Efua's heart. However, when Efua discovers she is pregnant, the world she knows begins to crumble. Fear, denial, and panic grip her as she comes to terms with the reality of her situation. When she tells Kwabena, his reaction is one of shock and fear. Unable to face the consequences, he distances himself, leaving Efua to confront her future alone. The once carefree boy who promised adventure becomes a painful reminder of broken dreams. As the weight of her secret grows unbearable, Efua decides she must leave Cape Coast to protect her family from disgrace and judgment. In the dead of night, she packs her belongings, taking one last look at her sleeping parents and the home that held her childhood. Boarding a bus to Accra, she steps into the unknown, guided by a mixture of fear, resolve, and the hope of a better life. A mysterious old woman on the bus hints at the trials ahead, warning Efua that the journey will test her more than she realizes. The bus lurches forward, leaving Cape Coast and the only life Efua has ever known behind, as she embarks on a path filled with uncertainty and sacrifice. The bus ride to Accra felt endless, the dark, undulating road stretching out like a thread leading her away from everything she knew. The rhythmic jostling of the vehicle should have lulled Efua into a restless sleep, but her mind raced, replaying the events that had brought her here. Outside, the first hints of dawn painted the horizon with streaks of pink and gold, a stark contrast to the shadow that seemed to cloud her future. When the bus finally pulled into the station, the city began to awaken around her. Accra was alive in a way that Cape Coast never was, full of shouts, the clamor of vendors setting up their stalls, and the constant hum of conversation. The air was thick with the mingling scents of fried dough, diesel, and sea salt, an intoxicating blend that both thrilled and unsettled her. Efua stepped off the bus, her small bag clutched tightly in one hand. The station was a maze of people moving in every direction. Women balancing bundles on their heads, men calling out routes for trotros, and children darting between the crowd, their laughter piercing the noise. She felt small and lost, swallowed up by the city's chaos. The sun climbed higher, and with it the temperature rose, pressing down on her like a physical weight. "Where do I go now?" she muttered to herself, the enormity of her decision sinking in. Accra held the promise of anonymity, but it also held dangers she was not prepared for. The city's pulse beat beneath her feet, each thump a reminder that she had no one to rely on but herself. She wandered the streets, eyes wide as she took in the market stalls filled with colorful cloths, fragrant spices, and shiny trinkets that seemed to sparkle in the harsh light. The noise was overwhelming, sellers shouting over each other, horns blaring, and the rhythmic drumming of street performers. It was a world away from the familiarity of Cape Coast's gentle mornings and lulling sea breeze. "Watch your step, young lady," an older man with a kind smile called as he passed her, nodding toward the uneven pavement. Efua managed a small nod of gratitude before turning to survey her surroundings. She needed a place to stay, a job, anything to anchor her in this strange new world. Hours passed, and the gnawing hunger in her stomach became impossible to ignore. With only a few coins to her name, Efua bought a small loaf of bread from a vendor and found a shaded corner to rest. As she sat, tearing off small bites, she felt the weight of the city's indifference. Here, she was just another face in a crowd, another body moving through the streets. The realization sent a shiver down her spine. Suddenly, a voice broke through the noise. "First day in Accra?" Efua looked up to see an older woman with sharp eyes and a kind smile. She was dressed in a faded wrapper, her hair wrapped neatly in a cloth. "You look lost, child." Efua hesitated before nodding. Yes, Auntie, she replied, the word slipping out automatically, as it was used to address older women out of respect. The woman's smile deepened, revealing lines that spoke of years spent weathering the city's trials. Be careful here, the woman said, her tone serious. Accra will test you, and not everyone here is kind. I know, Efua whispered, her fingers tightening around the last bite of bread. The woman's eyes seemed to search her face, as if reading the story written in the furrow of her brow and the tightness of her jaw. Stay near the market for now. There's safety in numbers, the woman advised before disappearing into the crowd, leaving Efua with more questions than answers. The sun blazed overhead, relentless and unforgiving, as the city's symphony continued around her. And as Efua looked out over the crowded streets, her heart pounded with a mix of fear and determination. The city was vast, unpredictable, and full of hidden opportunities, but it was also a place that could swallow her whole if she wasn't careful. As the day wore on, Efua's eyes drifted to a small shop with bright fabric draped in its window. A sign above read Abena's Tailoring and Fabric Shop. The gentle hum of a sewing machine reached her ears, and for the first time, hope flickered in the shadows of her doubt. Perhaps, amidst the chaos, there was a thread of stability she could grasp. The sun dipped lower as the afternoon unfolded into shades of gold and orange, casting long shadows across the bustling market. Efua stood in front of Abena's Tailoring and Fabric Shop, the soft whir of a sewing machine weaving through the air. The rhythmic sound stirred a pang of familiarity and comfort within her. It reminded her of Mame Essie, tirelessly stitching by the window of their small house, the fabric slipping through her fingers with a mother's care. Taking a deep breath, Efua stepped into the shop. The air inside was cool, tinged with the scent of fabric and the metallic hint of needles and scissors. Rolls of vibrant cloth were stacked in every corner, their colors vibrant against the wooden walls. The shop was both small and cozy, filled with the soft hum of work. Behind a table strewn with spools of thread and measuring tape stood a woman with keen eyes and a gentle smile. Hello, young one, the woman said, pausing her work to look up. Her gaze swept over Efua, taking in the dust on her shoes and the wariness in her eyes. What can I do for you? Efua's throat tightened as she struggled to find her voice. I'm looking for work, she said, the words coming out more as a plea than a statement. Her fingers twisted the strap of her bag, the only sign of her anxiety. The woman's expression shifted, a shadow of understanding crossing her features. She set down her measuring tape and moved around the table, wiping her hands on her apron. My name is Abena, she said, her voice warm and inviting. This is my shop. Efua, she replied, relief trickling into her voice as she met Abena's gaze. There was something in the woman's eyes, a depth that hinted at stories untold and kindness hard-won. Abena nodded, studying her with an intensity that made Efua shift on her feet. You're new here, aren't you? Yes, Efua admitted, the weight of the confession settling over her. I just arrived today. The older woman's mouth pressed into a thin line, her gaze softening as she considered Efua's words. Accra is not an easy place to start, she said, more to herself than to Efua. Then, after a moment's pause, she sighed. I can't offer much, but I could use an extra pair of hands around here. It won't be easy work, and the pay is small, but it's honest. A wave of gratitude washed over Efua, and she struggled to keep the tears at bay. Thank you, Auntie Abena, she said, the form of address slipping out naturally, as if this place were already a safe harbor in the vast sea of the city. Come, let me show you what needs to be done, Abena said, motioning for Efua to follow her. The workroom at the back of the shop was cluttered with scraps of fabric, patterns pinned to the walls, and a sewing machine that hummed like a contented cat. The room felt alive, a space filled with both chaos and creation. As Abena explained the tasks, cutting fabric, sorting buttons, organizing the shelves, Efua's hands moved automatically, muscle memory from years of helping her mother with her sewing projects. The familiarity of the motions grounded her, giving her a momentary sense of peace. Hours slipped by unnoticed, the sun setting beyond the shop's small window. The noise of the market outside faded into a low murmur, replaced by the steady hum of the sewing machine and the occasional clatter of scissors on the table. For the first time since she had stepped off the bus, Efua felt a sliver of hope. When the work was done for the day, Abena handed her a small plate of fried plantains and beans. "Eat," she said, her tone leaving no room for refusal. "You'll need your strength." Efua took the plate, the warmth of the food seeping into her hands, and nodded her thanks. The simple meal tasted better than anything she had eaten in days, each bite a reminder that she was still here, still fighting. "Where are you staying?" Abena's question cut through the quiet, her eyes watching Efua over the rim of her cup. Efua's pause was answer enough. Abena sighed, setting her cup down with a clink. "There's a cot in the back. It's not much, but it's safe. You can stay there until you find your footing." A lump formed in Efua's throat, and she blinked rapidly to keep the tears from falling. "Thank you," she whispered, the words thick with emotion. Abena's smile was small but genuine. "Rest now, child. Tomorrow the real work begins." As the shop settled into silence and the lanterns cast their warm glow, Efua lay on the small cot in the corner. The unfamiliar creaks and whispers of the city filtered through the walls, mingling with the hum of distant voices and the occasional bark of a stray dog. Yet, despite the strangeness of the place, a sense of calm washed over her. In this tiny corner of Accra, she was not just a girl who had left everything behind. She was something else, someone trying to build a future, one stitch at a time. But as the city outside moved to its own relentless rhythm, Efua knew that peace was fragile. Accra was vast, filled with hidden dangers, and she was only beginning to understand the price of survival. The first light of dawn seeped through the small window, painting the walls of Abena's shop with a pale glow. Efua woke to the creaks of the city coming alive, vendors calling out their wares, the thud of carts being pushed over uneven cobblestones, and the rhythmic calls of trotro drivers announcing their routes. The air was already thick with heat, promising another sweltering day in Accra. Efua sat up on the narrow cot, her muscles aching from the unfamiliarity of the hard mattress and yesterday's work. But today the ache felt different, less burdensome, as if she had begun to carve out a small space for herself in this sprawling, chaotic city. The memory of Abena's kindness the night before wrapped around her like a protective cloak, giving her the strength to face what lay ahead. "Good morning, Efua," Abena called from the main room, her voice warm but brisk. The older woman was already at her work table, a half-finished dress pinned under her skilled fingers. "Come, there's work to be done." Efua rose, splashed her face with cool water from a basin, and joined Abena in the front of the shop. The sun cast beams of golden light across the rolls of fabric, making the colors glow. It was a small, beautiful moment that Efua let herself savor. The morning passed in a blur of tasks, measuring, cutting, and organizing orders for the day. Customers came and went, their chatter filling the small shop. Some were wealthy women draped in gold jewelry and vibrant wax prints, while others were mothers and daughters, their faces lined with the shared stories of struggle and hope. "Watch how I finish this seam," Abena instructed, guiding Efua's hands with a patient firmness. The older woman's presence was steady, her movements confident as she demonstrated techniques that had taken her a lifetime to perfect. Efua watched, absorbing each detail, grateful for the distraction and the knowledge that made her feel, if only for a moment, capable and valued. Just after midday, a customer entered the shop, a young man with a swagger that drew glances. He was well-dressed, wearing a crisp white shirt and tailored trousers that marked him as someone who had done well for himself. His eyes, sharp and curious, scanned the shop before settling on Efua. "Good afternoon, Auntie Abena," he greeted, his smile smooth as polished stone. "I'm here for the fabric I ordered last week." "Ah, Kwaku, it's ready," Abena said, turning to a shelf and pulling down a bundle of brightly colored cloth. "Let me just make sure everything is in order." As Abena checked the fabric, Kwaku's eyes drifted back to Efua. "You're new here," he said, the statement more observation than question. "Yes," Efua replied, meeting his gaze with an evenness she didn't feel. Something about his stare made her pulse quicken, and not in the way Kwabena's had. There was a knowing edge to it, as if he could see the vulnerability she worked so hard to mask. "Accra is a big city," he continued, leaning a little closer. "It's not easy for someone on their own." Before Efua could respond, Abena returned with the fabric, breaking the tension. "Here you go, Kwaku. That will be 200 cedis." Kwaku handed over the money, his eyes flicking back to Efua once more before he left. The shop door closed behind him, and the room felt lighter, as if a storm cloud had passed. "Be careful of men like him," Abena said quietly, her eyes sharp as they met Efua's. "They come with smooth words and promises, but their intentions are rarely pure." Efua nodded, the warning sinking into her like a stone. She had learned that lesson the hard way with Kwabena, but the reminder was necessary. Accra might be filled with opportunities, but it was also filled with dangers she hadn't even begun to understand. The days turned into weeks, and Efua settled into a rhythm at the shop. Each day was filled with work that left her hands raw and her feet aching, but it was honest work. Abena became more than an employer. She was a mentor, teaching Efua not just the craft of sewing, but also the unspoken rules of surviving in the city. Yet as the weeks passed, Efua's small savings dwindled, and the reality of her situation pressed down on her. Nights were the hardest. When the shop was quiet and the streets outside hummed with distant music and laughter, the loneliness settled in like a shadow. The thought of the life growing inside her became a constant thrum of anxiety, a reminder that every day brought her closer to a truth she could not outrun. One evening, as she sat by the window and watched the lanterns glow like fireflies in the dark, Abena spoke up from her work table. "Efua, you've been here a while now. What brought you to Accra?" Her voice was calm, but the question cut through the quiet like a blade. Efua's chest tightened and she looked away, the memory of Cape Coast surfacing in painful clarity. The sound of her father's voice, the warmth of her mother's hands, the old baobab tree where dreams had turned to dust, all of it rushed back in a wave. "I needed to leave home," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. It was the truth, though not the whole of it. Abena's eyes softened, understanding flickering in their depths. "This city has a way of testing us all," she said, her voice gentler now. "But you're strong. I see it in the way you carry yourself." Efua swallowed, the words a strange comfort that made her feel both seen and exposed. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and turned her gaze back to the street where life continued on, oblivious to the turmoil inside her. The night deepened, and Efua lay on her cot, the cool breeze brushing her skin. The weight of uncertainty pressed down on her, but so did the whisper of hope. She was here. She was surviving. And tomorrow would come, as it always did. But Accra was not a place that allowed secrets to stay buried. And as the days grew longer, Efua knew that the city had a way of revealing truths, whether one was ready or not. The next few weeks tested Efua's resolve more than she could have imagined. The days were long and grueling, the work at Abena's shop relentless. The calluses on her hands thickened, and the ache in her back became a constant reminder of her situation. But amid the exhaustion, Efua found small moments of solace. Abena's quiet encouragement, the rhythmic hum of the sewing machine, and the satisfaction of seeing a garment completed under her hands. Yet, the city was merciless. The streets of Accra were a maze of opportunity and danger, where a single misstep could change everything. One afternoon, as she ran an errand for Abena, Efua encountered that reality firsthand. The market was packed, people pushing and shoving as they navigated the narrow aisles filled with spices, fresh produce, and vibrant cloth. The sun beat down, hot and unrelenting, and the air buzzed with the chatter of vendors and customers haggling over prices. As Efua maneuvered through the crowd, a hand suddenly grabbed her arm, rough and demanding. She spun around, her heart pounding, to see a young man with a sly grin and eyes that glinted with mischief. "Where are you rushing to, beautiful?" he said, his voice smooth, but edged with something that made her skin crawl. "Let me go," Efua said, trying to pull her arm free, but his grip tightened. Before the situation could escalate, a sharp voice cut through the noise. "Release her now." The man's expression darkened, but he released her arm and disappeared into the crowd, muttering under his breath. Efua turned to see a woman standing behind her, tall and commanding, with a headscarf wrapped elegantly around her head. Her eyes were dark and fierce, assessing Efua with a mixture of concern and recognition. "Are you all right?" the woman asked, her voice softer now. "Yes, thank you," Efua managed, her breath coming in gasps as the adrenaline surged through her veins. The woman nodded, a hint of a smile breaking through her stern expression. "Be careful. Child, Accra is not as forgiving as it seems. I will, Efua said, her voice steadier now. The woman gave her a final nod and melted back into the sea of people, her presence lingering like a protective shadow. The encounter left Efua shaken, a reminder of how vulnerable she truly was. When she returned to Abena's shop, the older woman took one look at her pale face and frowned. What happened, child? She asked, her hands stilling in their work. I'm fine, Efua lied, sinking onto a stool and taking a deep breath. The room, with its familiar clutter and soft scent of fabric, felt like a sanctuary against the chaos outside. She described the encounter in brief, trying to downplay the fear that still lingered. Abena's eyes flashed with anger, and she reached out, her hand warm and steady on Efua's shoulder. Accra may be hard, but you're not alone here, Efua. Remember that. Tears pricked at the corners of Efua's eyes, and she blinked them away. She nodded, the simple gesture carrying more gratitude than words could convey. The days that followed brought an unexpected sense of community. Customers who came to the shop recognized Efua's dedication, some offering kind words and smiles that reminded her of home. Abena, who had seemed stern and impenetrable at first, became a source of quiet support. One evening, as the shop closed and the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, Abena sat beside Efua. They shared a meal of jollof rice, the warmth of the food filling the small space with an aroma that spoke of home and comfort. You're learning quickly, Abena said, breaking the silence. Her eyes, usually sharp and focused, were softer now. Your mother must have been proud of you. Efua's heart clenched at the mention of her mother. The image of Mame Essie at her sewing table, eyes crinkled with laughter, surfaced unbidden. She swallowed the lump in her throat. She was, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She taught me everything I know. Abena's expression turned wistful, and she nodded slowly. Mothers give us strength, even when they're not here. Hold on to that, Efua. It will see you through the hardest days. The words hung in the air, wrapping around Efua like a warm embrace. The city outside was still vast and unpredictable, full of hidden dangers and challenges yet to come. But as she sat in the small shop, the hum of the sewing machine still echoing in her mind, she felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't much, but it was enough. As the days passed, the familiarity of her new routine brought a fragile sense of normalcy. But the city was relentless, and Efua's worries grew with each day. She had to find a way to make more money. Her current earnings were barely enough for her to save anything, and soon she would need more than a few coins hidden in her bag. One evening, as she lay on her cot and listened to the sounds of the city, Efua's thoughts turned to the child growing inside her. Fear gripped her, sharp and cold. How could she provide for a baby when she was barely surviving herself? The weight of responsibility felt like a stone tied to her chest, pulling her deeper into uncertainty. A soft knock at the shop's back door startled her, and she sat up, her heart racing. Abena was already at the door, peering out into the dark street. She opened it slightly, and a figure stepped into the dim light. A young girl, thin and wide-eyed, clutching a bundle wrapped in cloth. "Auntie Abena, please, I need help," the girl said, her voice trembling. Abena's face softened, and she reached out to guide the girl inside. Efua watched as the scene unfolded, curiosity and worry intertwining in her chest. "Efua, help me get her some water," Abena said, her tone urgent but calm. As Efua hurried to fetch a cup, she caught the girl's gaze, and in that brief moment, she saw her own fear mirrored there. Accra was not just a city of dreams, it was a city of survival. And as the girl took a sip of water, her hands shaking, Efua knew that they were all bound by the same silent understanding. In this place, hope was a lifeline, and kindness was rare and precious. But beneath that moment of shared compassion, whispers of the past stirred, and Efua realized that her journey was only just beginning. The shop's atmosphere was heavy with an unspoken tension, as the young girl, whose name they learned was Ama, sat on a stool, her eyes darting nervously around the room. The bundle she held was clutched to her chest like a lifeline, and her breathing was shallow as if she'd been running. "Drink slowly," Abena instructed, her voice soothing as she handed Ama another cup of water. The girl's hands were trembling so much that the water sloshed over the rim. Efua watched silently from her cot, the sight stirring something deep within her, a reminder that she was not alone in facing the harshness of the city. After a moment, Amma looked up, tears brimming in her wide eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. She glanced down at her bundle, and Efua noticed for the first time that it moved slightly. The realization hit her like a jolt. Amma was holding a baby. Abena's expression softened even more as she reached out and gently touched the edge of the cloth. "How long have you been out there, Amma?" she asked, her tone both curious and concerned. "Since last night," Amma admitted, her voice hoarse. "I had nowhere else to go. They told me you might help." Efua's chest tightened as she listened. The fear and desperation in Amma's voice echoed her own worries, the knowledge that safety in Accra was often as fleeting as the wind. Abena nodded, her eyes shadowed with understanding. "Rest here tonight," Abena said, guiding Amma to a corner where she could sit comfortably. "We'll figure out the rest in the morning." Amma's shoulders slumped with relief, and tears slipped down her cheeks as she whispered, "Thank you." As the night deepened and the sounds of the city quieted into a low hum, Efua lay on her cot, unable to close her eyes. The image of Amma and her baby stayed with her, an unbidden reminder of what she faced and what she had yet to face. The silent cries of an infant, muffled by the fabric, punctuated the night, carrying an urgency that made sleep impossible. Morning arrived with the soft glow of dawn filtering through the small window. The air was still and warm, hinting at the heat that would come later in the day. Abena moved quietly through the shop, preparing for the day's work, while Amma sat in the corner, her baby nestled against her chest, asleep. Efua watched them as she sipped a cup of tea Abena had brewed. The sight of Amma cradling her child stirred a mix of emotions, fear, empathy, and an unexpected surge of determination. She could no longer afford to linger in uncertainty. If she was going to survive, she needed a plan. "I'll be back soon," Efua said to Abena, setting her cup down. Abena glanced at her, a question in her eyes, but said nothing, only nodding as if she understood. Efua stepped out into the early morning light, the streets just beginning to fill with the familiar sounds of vendors setting up their stalls and the clatter of carts. She walked quickly, weaving through the alleys that crisscrossed the market district, until she reached a street she had passed many times before. It was lined with small shops and stalls selling everything from second-hand clothes to handmade jewelry. She had heard whispers from other workers that some of these places hired people willing to do whatever work needed to be done, no questions asked. The first shop she entered was small and dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of leather and dye. A man with a lined face looked up from his work, a pair of reading glasses perched on his nose. "I'm looking for work," Efua said, her voice steady but hopeful. The man raised an eyebrow, studying her for a moment. "Can you sew?" "Yes," she replied, and it wasn't a lie. Years of helping Mame Essie had taught her more than just the basics. The man nodded slowly. "Come back tomorrow. If you can keep up, I'll pay you by the day." Relief flooded Efua's chest, and she nodded, thanking him before stepping back into the bright street. It wasn't much, but it was something, a step toward securing her future and that of the life growing inside her. She knew it would be hard, but the sight of Amma and her baby the night before had solidified her resolve. As she walked back to Abena's shop, the city seemed a little less daunting, the noise less oppressive. The challenges were still there, pressing at her from all sides. But for the first time since she had arrived in Accra, Efua felt a flicker of hope. She was not defeated yet, and as long as she had breath in her body, she would keep fighting. Stepping back into the shop, she saw Abena glance at her, the question clear in her eyes. Efua nodded, a small smile breaking across her face. "I found a second job," she said simply. Abena's expression shifted, the corners of her mouth lifting in approval. "Good," she said, her voice firm and proud. "Keep that fire, Efua. You'll need it." That evening, as the city settled into its familiar nighttime rhythm, Efua sat with Amma. The younger girl's baby cooed softly, the sound filling the shop with an unexpected warmth. "You're brave, you know," Amma said suddenly, her voice breaking the silence. Efua looked at her, surprised. "I'm just trying to survive," Efua replied, a bittersweet smile touching her lips. Amma nodded, her gaze drifting to her child. "Surviving is brave," she said softly, "especially here." The words echoed in Efua's mind as she lay on her cot that night, the moon casting a gentle glow across the room. Accra was a city of contrasts: hope and despair, survival and defeat, kindness and cruelty. But within those contrasts, Efua realized, lay the strength she needed to keep going. And as the baby's soft breathing mingled with the night sounds of the city, Efua knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them. For herself, for the life growing inside her, and for the chance at a future that was truly hers. The following weeks were a whirlwind of challenges and small victories. Efua settled into her routine at Abena's shop and worked long hours to prepare for the birth of her baby. The small cot in the back of the shop became her haven, and Abena's quiet encouragement was the thread that held her together when doubts crept in. Abena, who had once been a promising seamstress in her youth, opened up about her past as the bond between them deepened. "I had dreams once," Abena said one evening, her voice tinged with nostalgia. She worked on a dress as she spoke, her fingers moving with practiced ease. "I wanted to open a shop in Kumasi, bigger than this, but life had other plans." Efua listened intently, finding strength in the older woman's resilience. The stories of Abena's sacrifices and lost dreams became a source of quiet inspiration, a reminder that life, even when it turned cruel, could still be pieced together. Each day brought new challenges, but Efua's determination only grew. She worked tirelessly, learning everything she could and saving every coin possible. At night, she would place a hand over her growing belly, feeling the faint movements that reminded her of why she kept going. The city might have been harsh, but it had also shown her kindness in the form of Abena, Ama, and even the strangers who offered smiles and small acts of help. The night that would change everything came unexpectedly. The city was alive with the hum of nighttime life, the streets lit with lanterns that glowed like stars scattered across the dark canvas. Efua was alone in the shop, Abena having gone to visit a friend across the neighborhood. The weight of her belly made every movement a chore, and a dull ache had been gnawing at her back for hours. Suddenly, a sharp pain shot through her, taking her breath away. She gasped, clutching the edge of the table as the realization hit her. This was not just fatigue. The pains came again, harder and closer together, leaving her no doubt the baby was coming. Panic set in as the world blurred around her. She grabbed her bag, already packed with the essentials she had managed to gather, and stumbled out into the night. The street was quieter than usual, most shops closed, their doors locked tight. Each step sent a jolt of pain up her spine, but she pushed forward, her breaths ragged and shallow. A few blocks away, Efua found an old, abandoned building she had passed many times. It was dark, its roof half collapsed, but it would have to do. She made her way inside, the echo of her steps ringing in the emptiness. Fear and pain threatened to overwhelm her, but she bit down on it, focusing only on the task ahead. As the hours dragged on, the pain intensified, rolling over her in relentless waves. She gripped a piece of torn cloth, biting down to keep from crying out. The city outside continued as if unaware of the life fighting to enter it. The air was thick with the smell of dust and age, mingled with her sweat and the metallic tang of blood. "Breathe, Efua," she whispered to herself, her voice shaking as another contraction gripped her. Time became meaningless as she pushed, her body straining with the effort. Just as the first light of dawn began to filter through the cracked walls, a cry pierced the silence. It was raw, small, and fierce. Efua let out a sob of relief, the sound catching in her throat as she pulled the tiny, squirming body to her chest. His cries filled the room, echoing off the walls like a declaration of victory. "Kojo," she whispered, tears streaming down her face as she cradled her son. The name, chosen in secret moments, now belonged to the small life in her arms. Exhaustion washed over her, but so did an overwhelming sense of joy and love that made her heart ache. The morning light grew stronger, casting a warm glow over them. For a moment, all the fear, the struggle, and the loneliness melted away, replaced by the fragile, beautiful bond between mother and child. But as Kojo's cries quieted and the weight of reality returned, Efua's joy was tempered by a sobering realization. The tiny life in her arms was hers to protect, and the city outside was not kind. With trembling fingers, she wrapped him in a piece of cloth she had brought and kissed his forehead. She would do whatever it took to give him a chance, whether that meant sacrificing her own dreams or facing an uncertain future. The world outside might have been indifferent, But within this moment, within this small, abandoned space, Efua felt the fierce resolve of a mother who would fight for her son, no matter the cost. The first few moments after Kojo's birth passed in a haze of exhaustion and emotion. Efua lay on the cold, uneven floor, every muscle in her body trembling from the effort. Kojo's tiny cries filled the space, a sound so fragile and fierce that it anchored her, giving her strength she didn't know she had left. She pressed a trembling kiss to his forehead, the warmth of his skin a grounding force amidst the chaos. "You're here now," she whispered, tears slipping down her cheeks. The rush of relief was quickly overtaken by the gnawing fear of what came next. The abandoned building was no place for a newborn. Dust motes danced in the thin beam of morning light that streamed through a crack in the wall, and the musty air seemed to thicken around her. She needed to get them out of there, find shelter, safety, something more than these crumbling walls. With painstaking slowness, Efua gathered her strength. Each movement sent a fresh wave of pain coursing through her body, but she pushed it aside. Wrapping Kojo securely in the piece of cloth she had brought, she cradled him against her chest, feeling the steady thump of his tiny heartbeat. It was enough to fuel her next steps. The city outside had come alive with the morning hustle. The distant sounds of street vendors calling out their wares, the creak of carts, and the chatter of people going about their day seemed almost mocking in its normalcy. Efua took a deep breath and stepped out into the light, squinting as the sun met her weary eyes. She didn't know where to go, but found her feet guiding her back toward Abena's shop. The distance stretched endlessly before her, each step a test of her endurance. Kojo's soft whimpers filled the silence between her ragged breaths, urging her forward. When she reached the shop, Abena's sharp eyes spotted her immediately from where she stood adjusting fabric in the window. The older woman's expression shifted from confusion to shock and then concern in the span of a heartbeat. "Efua, child, what?" Abena hurried over, her hands outstretched as Efua stumbled inside. He came early," Efua managed, her voice thin and trembling. She sank onto a chair, her arms still protectively around Kojo. Abena's face softened as she took in the scene, the young girl, pale and exhausted, clutching the tiny bundle that now whimpered in her arms. "Oh, Efua," Abena whispered, reaching out to gently touch Kojo's head. The baby squirmed, his tiny fists waving in the air, and a soft smile broke through Abena's worry. "He's beautiful." Efua's vision blurred with tears as she nodded. "But I don't know how. I don't know how to do this," she admitted, the weight of the unknown pressing down on her. The city outside suddenly felt larger, more daunting, as she thought of what it would take to keep her son safe. Abena's eyes were full of an emotion Efua couldn't quite name. Compassion, yes, but something deeper, born of experience. She placed a warm hand on Efua's shoulder. "You're not alone in this. We'll figure it out together." The words broke the dam of fear and exhaustion inside her, and Efua let the tears come. They streamed down her face silently as she held Kojo close, feeling the tiny rise and fall of his chest against hers. The moment stretched, tender and raw, until the exhaustion claimed her completely. Her head fell back, eyes closing as sleep, heavy and dreamless, pulled her under. When Efua awoke, the sky had darkened, and the sounds of the city were quieter, softened by the night. A warm blanket had been draped over her shoulders, and Kojo was swaddled next to her, sleeping peacefully. The room was bathed in the soft, flickering glow of lanterns, casting long, comforting shadows on the walls. Abena was seated nearby, her sewing forgotten as she watched over them. When she noticed Efua stir, she stood and approached, her footsteps light. "You slept through the day," Abena said, her voice gentle. "You needed it." Efua nodded, still groggy, and reached out to touch Kojo's tiny hand, feeling the softness of his skin. A mixture of love and worry bubbled up inside her, twisting in her chest. "Thank you, Auntie Abena," she said, her voice breaking with gratitude. Abena waved her hand dismissively, but her eyes were warm. "You don't need to thank me. This city tests us all, but it also has a way of bringing people together." They sat in silence for a while, the only sounds the soft coos of Kojo and the distant clamor of the street. Efua knew that their journey was just beginning. The challenges ahead would be many, and the city with its harsh edges and fleeting kindness would push her to limits she hadn't even imagined. but she also knew that with Kojo in her arms, she had a reason to fight like never before. The days following Kojo's birth were marked by an unrelenting sense of worry for Efua. She moved through Abena's shop with the exhaustion of sleepless nights and the constant gnaw of fear. Her love for Kojo was fierce, but so was the realization that she couldn't provide the life he needed. Accra's streets were unforgiving, and the kindness of strangers only stretched so far. One evening, as the city hummed with the sounds of life outside, Efua sat on the cot. Kojo nestled in her arms. The lantern cast a warm glow on their faces, but the shadows seemed longer tonight, more foreboding. Abena watched from the work table, her gaze soft with worry. "You can't keep going like this, Efua," Abena said finally, her voice gentle but firm. "He deserves a chance. You both do." Efua's eyes filled with tears. "I know, Auntie," she whispered, pressing her lips to Kojo's tiny forehead. The weight of her decision pressed down on her like a stone. She knew what she had to do, but it felt like tearing out a piece of her soul. The next morning, before the first light of dawn painted the sky, Efua wrapped Kojo in the soft cloth she had saved and set out through the still sleeping city. The streets were quiet, the only sound the soft patter of her footsteps and the occasional rustle of leaves as the wind passed through. The world felt both vast and suffocating as she approached the gates of the Mensa mansion. The house loomed large, its polished windows reflecting the pale glow of the early morning. Efua's heart hammered in her chest as she stepped closer, every beat echoing her resolve. She knelt by the gate and placed Kojo down, her hands lingering as she memorized the feel of him, the warmth of his skin, the tiny trusting hand that clutched at her finger even now. "Forgive me," she whispered, tears blurring her vision. She knocked on the gate with a trembling fist and slipped into the shadows, her heart breaking with every step she took away from him. From her hiding spot, she watched as the door opened, and Mrs. Mensa stepped out, her eyes wide with shock as she saw the bundle at the gate. She picked up Kojo, cradling him with a look of disbelief and something that made Efua's chest ache: compassion. Efua turned away, tears streaming down her face as she walked into the gathering dawn. The streets swallowed her, and with every step she forced herself not to turn back, not to run to her son and hold him one last time. She had made her choice. Days passed in a blur of empty hours and hollow silence. Efua kept herself busy, helping Abena at the shop, her hands moving automatically as her mind wandered to thoughts of Kojo. Each passing day felt heavier than the last, the weight of her decision pressing harder with every heartbeat. One afternoon, a woman from the neighborhood came to the shop, chattering about news from across town. "Did you hear? The Mensa family has taken in an abandoned child. The talk of the neighborhood, it is," she said, eyes wide with intrigue. Efua's heart stuttered, and her hands faltered in their work. She kept her face neutral, nodding absent-mindedly as the woman continued, but her mind was elsewhere. Kojo was safe. He was being cared for. But that night, as she lay on her cot with exhaustion pressing down like a lead blanket, a thought broke through the haze. What if he forgot her? What if this was the last connection they'd ever share? A soft knock at the door startled her, and Abena's face appeared, etched with concern. "Efua, there's someone here to see you." Before she could respond, the sound of footsteps reached her ears, and a figure stepped into the room, their shadow stretching across the floor. Efua's breath caught, and her heart thudded in her chest as she looked up into the sharp, assessing eyes of Mrs. Mensa. I hope you have enjoyed this episode. Stay tuned for episode 3.